Thanks for joining us. My name is Ibrahim, Sani. So, Budget 2024. It's going to be tabled in just a few days, and we're awaiting some of the announcements, maybe key announcements that is going to be made by the Prime Minister in the August House of the Dewan Rakyat. But for now, we need to also explore some of the salient points of what to expect from this particular budget. Joining us in the studio is Sohlian Seng, the head of tax at KPMG. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the developments that you see. I think for now we can safely assume GST is not going to be on the books, or do you have a different opinion on this?
Well, this is always a mystery. We will only know until 13 October whether GST is going to be out. But obviously, if you look for some businesses and all that, some parties are actually expecting it to be announced in terms of that. And of course, I suppose the government is now trying to strike a balance in terms of whether to introduce a GST in the light of the current economic situation. And I still remember what the PM said during the recent National Tax Conference. When we talk about Malaysia tax policy, two fundamental that is important to be observed. Number one, we only need to pay the necessary taxes. Number two, it should not be burdened to the rakyat. So if you go by this spirit, for example, then on the basis that if our economy, global economy is still a burden to the rakyat and all that, then perhaps this may not be announced or may not be implemented this 2024.
Speaking of which, burden to the rakyat, T20, T5 and T1 is still a burden to pay 1 or 2 or even 3 percentage points more than what is necessary. My tax bracket has always been on the top end, and I hate to see my tax bracket grow even further. This is of course an idea where you're still taxing against labor instead of capital, which is what I'm trying to shift my focus on. CGT or capital gains tax is there. We're looking at capital investments, private equity even. Maybe you can walk through with us in terms of what the government is up to when it comes to taxing people that are using capital on wealth.
Okay. When you talk about the CGT, obviously this point has been announced in even the recent retable budget. And Malaysia have been a long time. We don't have a CGT as compared to other countries. In fact, that is the key point where most investors maybe look out for Malaysia as a place of investment in terms of that. But of course, on another hand, if you look at what the PM announced in the retable budget, they are talking about in line with the international best practice according to the OECD. That is where this concept of CGT comes in. On one hand is to increase the revenue for the government as well. But I think what is key when we talk about this CGT, for example, that I mentioned in the announcement, my point of view, they were talking about this should be imposed on companies, giving one example. So therefore, the acceptance from the public become important.
Sorry, companies, what do you mean? Like private equity companies?
No, companies. Generally, those that fall under company will fall under here.
And it's Niaga Berhad, basically?
Yes. Obviously, when you talk about the private equity will fall under at the moment.
Not individual?
Not individual, not others and all that. But I think most of the wish list from the ground is that let's limit it to the companies.
What about like family offices or something along those, like straddle between the two realms?
If it fall under the definition of company, you will definitely fall under that. That is where the implication, with the implementation of the CGT would definitely have impact on this group of the company.
What is the quantum that we're looking at? Is it a lot?
Well, I don't have the data.
Yeah, but like GST, we're looking at 44 billion, for instance, or SSC 30 plus billion. Is it somewhere along those lines?
In my view, I don't have the data, but in my view, it may not, but it depends on how wide is the coverage. Because if you look at the announcement in the retable budget, obviously the only exemption they are looking at is only for those companies who do restructuring because of IPOs. But we know very well that companies sometimes they do restructuring is not because of IPO, it's for business efficiency and all that. So that group, if that can be extended, the exemption to cover that, then that will be good. But obviously, to answer your question, if that doesn't cover that, then the quantum can be huge in terms of that. So on that score, for non-corporate entity, with a different intention, like the private equity, wealth management and all that, in my view, it should be excluded for the purpose of this.
Let's talk about non-residential companies that are domiciled elsewhere. How do you think they are going to be impacted if they do a direct investment here in this country? Also, where do you feel the allure of us trying to get further investments from investors outside if we have all these new tax structures and regimes in place?
To me, tax is just one aspect. There are many other considerations for investors to consider. From my point of view, if you look at Malaysia, I think there are many other good things as well. So it all depends on the investors' wish list and what is they up to. But of course, if you're looking from the purely tax angle, then for a company, then definitely they will look at and compare to the intended investing countries that they want to do. So from that score, if you look at our corporate tax rate, for that example, those with strategic business angle, those group of company may be given certain type of tax incentive. So with that tax incentive, they're being given, yes, Malaysia can be one of the good destination from that aspect. To answer your question, on the basis where if there are new taxes coming in, okay, it depends on what type of new taxes. CGT, perhaps it may be one, right? But however, if you look at the countries over the world, there are many countries also having CGT. So to me, maybe
it's not new.
It's not new.
Out of the blue.
That's right. That's right. But even if you talk about the global minimum tax, for example, for the M&E, well, every other country who participate there will also be affected in terms of that. The question is, if you need to, for those existing investors that are already in Malaysia, the question is, if you need to relocate, for example, it may take more cost to relocate. So most of the time, under that circumstances, I would then advise my client, let's engage with our authority. If you are currently having incentive, for example, and for you to remain here, let's have the open engagement. Because when you talk about this GMT and all that, there may be other factors that our government can actually consider, for you to continue investing here.
Let's talk about GMT, global minimum tax, that is currently being thought of being implemented in 2024, maybe 25.
Well, that is a very good question. And in fact, I think most companies or businesses are talking about that.
We've been talking about it for quite some time.
Yeah. I think for the ground, businesses, they are hoping that this can be deferred to 2025. From the government's perspective,
oh my God,
because of this 15% that most, I wouldn't say all, most M&E may be to a certain extent enjoying certain type of incentive, then that top-up tax will be there. So if you don't so-called implement this QMDTTU fast enough, maybe one may view that you may be losing the revenue there. But I think what is important is how to strike a balance. At the moment, I think what is clear, perhaps two countries that have talked that they were going to implement in 2024, South Korea and Japan. But when we talk compared to other countries within this region, even Singapore, for example, they're looking at 2025. So this is actually a key point, an interesting key point that we got to wait in this coming budget, whether our government really want to proceed with 2024 or consider 2025. But I think my view here is, while you can consider 2024, but let's be open. Maybe there are certain industries, certain type of businesses may require more time. Let's be open and not so rigid. Maybe consideration can be given during this transition period.
But the thing is, if you talk about the ill-preparedness of corporates in terms of trying to be compliant with new tax regimes, it's a chicken and egg argument. They will never be ready until the law is mandated upon them. Even for GST, now there's talks. I don't know, I mean, these are just rumors lah. It's no longer customs is going to do it, it's going to be MOF. This is what I heard. I don't know if you hear differently. But whatever it is, if it's not, if you don't put a start date for these kind of things, a hard start date, people are just going to, put it on a wallpaper somewhere, on a board somewhere in the office, and not dedicate time, effort, resources, people, whatever, to get it done. So do you feel that the need for the government to do, I wouldn't say drastic measures, but announcements that are key has to be done in this budget, and a start date that is as clear as day? Do you think that is the motion right now?
Yeah, I think in terms of that, I would agree with you that I think practically businesses, certainty is very important. In fact, if you look at the recent retable of budget, when you talk about the capital gains tax, luxury tax, that has been made an announcement, right? So if you look at from that angle, in fact, the government is actually announcing early. But of course, implementation, the mechanism how to implement comes later. The details come later. So if talking about GST, in fact, GST, the concept is not new.
It's not.
To me, I think businesses, those already existed for many years and have already implemented, they should be familiar with that.
No, it's not about that. It's about the political cost of implementing GST, something that both you and I are not going to be equipped to address, because this is the question of public acceptance, of policy acceptance, and many more, of popularity.
Sure.
Have you factored that in KPMG? What's the House view in terms of the political cost of this?
Well, if you look at it purely from the government's perspective, well, tax reform is important. Obviously, they have a choice how they want to implement that. Of course, if you look at currently, over 170 countries already implemented GST. To say that
over 170
countries. So to say that this is not a good tax platform, I think is difficult to dispute. Obviously, every type of taxes will have their pro and con, but I think it's a matter of how do you managing and balancing it up, right? So if you compare that, if other countries, over 170, have implemented that, and to a certain extent already assisted the country, I suppose that consumption tax regime is not too bad. And in fact, if you look at that concept, my view is it go in line perhaps with the Madani economy framework. In terms of that, maybe the issue here is the effectiveness of the implementation. So
also the efficiency of tax refund.
So perhaps that part can be relook at it and improve in a good version, perhaps, since we already have that past experience. So now we can actually address some of this targeted area to have an improved version. I don't know. That's my view.
Let's take a view away from consumption tax, and now let's take a look into wealth tax, inheritance tax, specifically inheritance. Actually, I want to explore that. We've had it up until 1992, if I'm not mistaken, or 91, something like that.
91, yeah.
And then we have 5%, am I right? 5% of taxation. Of course, top bracket is 40-50%, somewhere in Japan or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so are we going to see the re-emergence of inheritance tax?
It's a very good question. I don't have an answer for that, but of course, again, if
let's take it this way. Let me rephrase my question. Do you think we should have an inheritance tax?
Okay. If I come from the angle of exploring new taxes, then obviously this is one of the new taxes that can be considered. Next question will be, with this implementation, how does it actually contribute in terms of the tax collection? Would that contribute a lot in terms of that? But if you were to understand the concept of this inheritance tax, basically it's actually tax on one generation to another. And if you look at it, is perhaps I may say a tax on inflation perspective. Question is, if you reflect back in terms of numbers, which I don't have at the moment, how does it material enough? Maybe at the moment, without numbers, my outright view is it may not be material, from that perspective. So the question here is, if we are going on the spirit of taxing the T20, right? Maybe this is one aspect that the expectation from the government, maybe, the way how I see. So to answer that, well, if the government have the intention to expand their base, obviously this is one. Question is it the right timing in terms of the concept of burdening the rakyat? If from that concept, then it may not be the right timing. Or sometimes new taxes, there's never be a good timing as well. So it has to be a political view to see that whether this is the right base to expand.
What about wealth tax?
I don't have much information about the wealth tax, but I will go according to the same concept in terms of this inheritance tax, going by way of what do we want our rakyat to pay? Is this something they're going to burden me? If answer is yes, then I would say then it go against that principle, right? So the other part is that whether from this platform, are we going to get more taxes, but by taxing it, you are restricting or discouraging people from investing in Malaysia. So they must have strike a balance between the two.
Okay, let's take a look into the whole budget 2024 per se, budget 2023 and the previous budgets before this. It's always on the issue of how well has the government disbursed the allocated funds. Some sort of a tracking mechanism has to be there. Right now we're unclear, or maybe it wasn't made public that loud and clear in terms of how much money needs to be disbursed. This is in terms of the disbursement. Collection we've been talking a bit, but on the disbursement side, what would be your wish list in terms of trying to see where the money goes? Is it towards more development funds, more OPEX? How do you view this?
Yeah, I think every year when it comes to budget, I think if we look at the economy report, there's some kind of percentage in terms of how they spend on the development account and also the OPEX account. I agree with you. I think transparency is very important in terms of that. Maybe that area can be perhaps relook at it, can be done better in terms of that. And when we look at as a whole, as a country as a whole, what is important is what would be our first priority. So if our priority in this case is to beef up our economy situation, then to me, focus should then be focused on development. But again, with the development, again, what should be the priority? That will be my view. OPEX, I think, is something that we also need that to run the country. In terms of that, question is how do we have a proper processes, control to minimize leakages? Maybe that sort of action or effort is important in terms of that. Yeah.
And finally, one area of concern is on the budget wish list per se. What do you want to be seen inside this budget?
Right. To me, the first one, I think all of us are talking about rising of costs. So that is very important. Obviously, I wish to see whether this budget, they can give some kind of, I wouldn't say incentive, but consideration for individual, perhaps at the M40, to have more disposable income. So that may help in terms of the rising of costs. But again, looking at the last retable budget, where they just reduced a certain point in terms of tax rate, so whether they're going to continue to introduce further reduction, perhaps it's unlikely. Maybe instead of looking at the reduction of rate, maybe one consideration wish list that I'm looking at is we have perhaps 20 relief or deductions in Malaysia.
Okay.
Right? 20.
I didn't realize it was that
so 20. So question is there a way to simplify it or combine some of this relief? Because my view here is if that's so, it make the process simplified. It actually benefit both taxpayer and the authority, right? 20, imagine if I claim all the 20 and if I'm being selected for review, how many documents that I need to review or rather the authority need to review? Maybe this is one consideration. Simplify it, you know. The second point I look at it is businesses. If you look at Malaysia, I suppose most of our businesses are all in the SME categories.
Yeah, 90+%.
90+%. Now, what do they need? You know, what do they need? What do they need to actually improve their business? And nowadays we talk about cash flow, for example. So of course, I take one example, say for example, in the manufacturing, in the SME category. All this while, we have an incentive like reinvestment allowance. That allowance is going to end soon.
Yeah.
So question here is, if this continue to give benefit to businesses, why can't we continue with that incentive? That's one. Second, now we are promoting digitalization, right? So SMEs, are they there? So question here is, how do we then help using tax tools to help them to be at that level? When you talk about digitalization, very important is IT costs, number one. Number two, upskilling of the staff. So to encourage them, perhaps government can consider that, number one, those who let the staff have this upskilling skill can get a double deduction on the training, perhaps, number one. Number two, when we talk about investment in IT, then infra IT, for example, those that can qualify for capital allowances. Maybe accelerate the capital allowances for an extended period of time.
I would like that. I'm running a small business. I would like that.
Exactly. So to me, I think these are the fundamental and the key point that important for us to help SMEs in their businesses.
Yeah, because it allows for greater cash flow management, which is the main point of an SME. Yeah. Final question is on this, Lian-Seng. Do you think that this government has what it takes to present a budget that is going to be beneficial for businesses and people? Are you looking at this government being a little bit more populist in this budget, or a little bit more structuralist? I don't know what's the opposite of populist, but structuralist, I guess.
Interesting question.
Yeah, the tough one. The tough one really for last.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that last question. Yeah. Now, if I were to look at the last 1-2 budgets and all that, again,
this is going to be an examination on the PM.
Yeah.
The February one, I don't count.
Sure.
Yeah.
But when I look at it, I think very important, I got to really look at the fundamental policy, what the PM is driving it. Like I mentioned earlier, PM is talking about every rakyat to pay the necessary tax, not burden them. But if I flip of it to look at what is the performance that, say, example, our hasil has been doing. If you look at, I think there's some quote given by the CEO, the collection has improved 20%. So if you look
the
at
voluntary
that,
disclosure as well.
that's one, yes, right, and the e-invoicing thing they're coming in. But if you look at the tax collection that has improved, that means that the approach that have taken is on the right direction. And I think in the quote they mentioned, if this continue to improve, they can even exceed the anticipated budget of 179.1 billion, right? So question now here is, while we can consider all the different new base of taxes, I think the initiative currently they are doing, for example, like hasil under the AES, Awareness, Education and System, does work. It gives a different perspective to taxpayer. It does build certain trust in the taxpayer. That's how you see the improvement in tax collection. But I think what is important, while we are talking about new bases, but just like you mentioned about SBDP, special volunteer. Actually, what's the purpose? Actually, what's the purpose?
To get them into the system, right?
Exactly. So question is, how big is that shadow economy? I remember 2019, they were talking about some figure about 300 billion or something.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So question is,
and here we are, clamoring about GST 40 plus billion.
Exactly.
Padahal, yeah, 300 billion.
300 billion. Exactly. So to me is that, in fact, that is a good platform to focus, and that itself, in the interim, you can actually collect more taxes, and that definitely will help the government to manage their fiscal debt. But I do agree, responsible utilization of taxes also important.
That is paramount.
That's right.
I mean, I got a brother-in-law, he's Swedish, 49% effective tax rate, income.
Yep.
He couldn't care less. That's why he stays there. And he's like, I mean, I can pay 24, 25% in Malaysia, but I don't want to stay here. So how you spend the money is much more important than how you take it. Final short one.
Final. I thought the song was final.
No, this one the short one. Isn't it easier if they give us a tax bill and then we sign off on it instead of us filling it up?
Talking about that, in fact, you look at our tax system, it's actually evolved. When I first joined this field, I call it a tax 1.0. That is called under the official assessment system. This is where perhaps your concept that comes in, whereby they will issue the return, I sign it off, I submit, settle, then it's up to the authority to come back and say, do you have this document, do you have that document? Then we move on to tax 2.0, which is in 1999, 2000, where the self-assessment comes in. This is the part that you mentioned, why I feel
with the 20 plus relief.
With the 20 plus relief and all that. So if you look at it now, we are now coming into tax 3.0, in fact, with the e-invoicing implementation. And all, we are going into a real time, So to answer your question, I think, maybe that is not for me to answer, but I believe with the new effort that Hasil is going to do, I think they are moving towards that, improving the compliance, improving the compliance
and I don't
methodology.
want to think about taxes also. If it's real time, I can...
Exactly. And if we look at
how tap the shadow economy once and for all.
Exactly. If you look at the concept of the e-invoicing implementation, just imagine now, for example, once it's really implemented next year for the large company, everything will be, the information will be then captured in the Hasil's data, right? So when it comes to year end, don't you think those information can actually form the first draft of how much tax you're supposed to pay? That is real time, Ibrahim? We are moving towards that, the way how I see it.
In fact, you don't have to wait. If it's real time, I can just periodically check what is my tax liability.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. So, LANGSUng, Head of Tax, KPMG. You want to learn more? Follow KPMG's report on the budget, post-budget report. You can also look for these kind of resources on astro.com. My name is Ibrahim, Sani. Catch you in the next one.
Saya ingin bebaskan rambut saya. Ya, lakukannya. Walau apa pun anda lakukan, jangan risau. Sunset Baharu dengan vitamin C, minyak argan dan elastin dalam Active Infusion. Untuk rambut lembut mengurai dengan haruman berpanjangan. Bebaskan rambut cantik anda dengan Sunset Baharu.
Kita orang benci kriket. Cikgu yang paksa kita main. Patut je walau pack game hari ni, kita dah tak payah dah nak main kriket bodoh ni.
Ini semua mak aku punya pasal. Dia yang suka nasi, jadi aku pun tak nak kecewakan dia. Awak semua ingat apa kat sini banyak sangat masa nak mengajar awak semua ni berkali-kali.
Cik Missy ada hati kat doktor.
Nak try doktor ke apa?
Yang mulut kau tu kan. Elok sikit boleh tak?
You anggap feeling saya ni tak important je.
I do care for you.
Rupanya doktor ni gatal juga.
Oh ya.
Cik Missy 123 di Astro Ria dan On Demand.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business and future affairs, bringing you market watch, analysis and insights. Today, of course, just ahead of the Budget 2024 tabling later this afternoon, we're taking a look back on the year that has been for the Malaysian economy, looking at key allocations, what have the outcomes been so far, with a fantastic in-house studio panel of course, Dr. Soraya Ismail, Director of Research with Khazanah Research Institute, KRI, Ding Hong Sing, National President with SME Malaysia, and rounded off with Lee Yun Han, Consulting Director with Deloitte, Southeast Asia. Welcome to studios. Thank you so much for making time for us ahead of Budget 2024. How's everyone doing?
Good. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you for having me here today.
Fantastic. Dr. Suraya, I'd love to get started off with us speaking a little bit more about housing, a key area of interest when it comes to some of the Budget 2024 calls for action, which include reinstating home ownership campaign. KRI's thoughts on this?
Thank you, Tehmina. Undoubtedly, in terms of housing, ownership is a very important factor. However, I think we have to ensure as well that prices of houses are affordable to begin with, so that people can actually buy these houses without highly financialization of these homes by having very expensive mortgages, so that these houses appear to be affordable. But at the same time, I think we're also missing a huge part of the discussion, which is what about rental? Because home ownership should go together with rental, and it should not go as if one is a priority over the other, or rental shouldn't be an option when houses are too expensive. So, and what are we doing for rental? Rental has been ongoing for a lot of years in our country, and yet we do not have a proper Rental Tenancy Act to govern the rental between owner and owner and the person who rent. So I think this is something that we could also look into, because this alone, the absence of it, can cause problems in supervising housing rental market, particularly when the market is dominated by speculative holders and landlords who will have mortgage obligations because they have the tendency to determine unreasonable rental prices for substandard residential spaces. Now, before incentives and subsidies are given by the government, because it's the budget, right? We need to first ensure that there are affordable homes to purchase. And then this home ownership campaign incentives would not be a smart move when the market is currently flooded with overhangs and unsold units. So the market correction can be not just for primary housing units, but also secondary, because we can see there's a lot of vacant properties in Malaysia, about 1.3 million vacant properties which are vacant in Malaysia now. So I think one should look into it in terms of, yes, home ownership campaign, but with affordable prices, and also look into rental as a way to provide shelter as well.
Definitely. So it has to be a lot more holistic and integrated, particularly looking at the fact that cost of living is increasing. And definitely this year has been a key year. Moving along from there into tax, another big block of a topic. Yun Han, so do you feel that the scheduled implementation of previously announced capital gains tax, CGT, on non-listed shares, luxury goods tax, can this help to fund Malaysia's massive pension bill as a rapidly aging nation? We've also got the targeted petrol subsidies, which have been creating quite a stir.
Yep. So I think when it comes to Malaysia as an aging nation, right, it is something that needs to be looked at a bit more longer term, right? And I think if I'm not mistaken, by 2025, we would expect that at least 15% of Malaysia's population will be above the age of 65. And that's talking about nearly 5 million Malaysians being above the age of 65. So that would then have longer term consequences on the impact to society from the healthcare perspective and also productivity standpoint, right? You're going to see a shrinking labor force as a result. So therefore, I believe that the government does need a longer term plan that will actually help the aging population for them to live better and continue to be productive even post-retirement, right? And to me, this goes beyond post-retirement savings or pension plans even, right? Because in other markets where we see aging populations, they are taking steps to activate this population, not just from a healthcare standpoint, but also from a workforce productivity standpoint. Because the elderly, they do have a lot of extensive experience that can benefit the younger generations in terms of skills development, coaching, and so on and so forth. And on top of that, the elderly should also have the option, if they so choose to take on jobs that provide a living wage in a safe environment to keep them physically and mentally active as well, right? So in Japan, for example, they are looking at, because they're already an aged nation, the government does provide incentives, policies that encourage retaining and rehiring the older workforce, and even down to the extent of providing subsidies around workplace restructuring of the infrastructure to be safer for the elderly to come back to work, right? And even when it comes to, let's say, Singapore, because we are also concerned around the elderly who may not have enough savings to sustain the longer years in life, they do provide what they call the Silver Support Scheme that provides financial assistance that are targeted towards elderly at the low income level. So to me, it's something that, yes, the tax breaks or the subsidies can help fund many things, but we do need a longer term plan when it comes to tackling the issue around the aging population here.
Absolutely. It cannot be something which we're looking as a stopgap measure and just as a so-called budget goodie. Mr. Ding, I want to ask you about GST. What do you think about the reintroduction for GST, especially from an SME Malaysia perspective?
Okay, GST is a good thing. It's a reduce the tax, but that's SMEs mean the benefit for the low GST. Rate because the what they have to pay the less the tax, and the product and the service this can call to help them to save money. General the GST is for the tax is for the very everybody have the same. You expect more, you can tax more. I hope this the GST is for the our business people is a good for the 4%, but it's don't increase until the 6%. But this GST because it's easy for the our businessmen to calculate input and output, and also is for the so no good thing. It's very important. The government is mean the tax and then the pay the tax, the refund the tax. At least it's 30 days to refund back. It's not refund back. Our SME is cash flow is very tight.
Understand. So right now, how long was the refund taking in the previous time when we had this GST that was causing problems for SMEs?
Because the I think last time have the GST because the refund back because as our SME the cash flow the financing is very tight, but it take a few months. Some is take the 10 months, 1 year also have. It is a very difficult for our SME for the funding because our SME is a fund cash flow is very tight.
Understand.
I hope the government is want to set out this GST and also it need 30 days to refund back our business people.
Making those parameters a lot stricter. Thank you, Mr. Ding. Moving on into job opportunities and wages. Yun Han, let's look at human capital development allocations, some of which have, of course, been highlighted in Budget 2023, and your perspective on how they can have a more strategic impact when it comes to one of our fundamentals, the workforce.
I think when we looked at like Budget 2023, for example, right, and the last year's budget, I'm encouraged to see allocations when it comes to skills development at the end of the day, because when it comes to the workforce and upskilling and also higher incomes, it comes back towards fundamentally the marketable skills that are required by industry in order for them to gainfully be employed and also to command higher wages on that, right? So the thing is that what I'm hoping to see for the next year's budget is that when we look at skills or investments into skills development, we do need to be much more granular and clearer when it comes to the policy direction, right? So what are the key skills, key jobs that Malaysia is looking at that then we're allocating budgets, programs towards, and what sort of jobs are we gearing up to, right? So for instance, when it comes to TVET, for example, right, we do have, I think, just over 50 colleges in TVET that offer courses in EV, for example, right? And I think one is being built or proposed to be built in Johor in 2026. So the question is, right, is that enough? Do we need more? Where are these people going when they graduate? Is the quality sufficient? And are they able to be placed into jobs that have higher level of incomes befitting these kind of next generation emerging technology jobs as well, right? So ultimately, it comes back to skills to drive that capacity to earn. And the good news is that I see that the private sector is increasingly looking at skills as a means to pay. Right, so instead of just I pay this much for a job, but I'm looking at skill sets, how much are these skills worth in the market, and paying for a person's collective skills coming into the work that needs to be done, right? And this helps them be more flexible in attracting, retaining talent based on skills. And at Deloitte, we call this the shift towards being a skills-based organization, right? Thinking of how they recruit, retain based on skill sets and not traditional jobs. That's how we look at it, right? So that's on the skills part. I think there's also allocations when it comes to social security, job worker welfare as well. And I believe that is needed because with the rise of technology, it is good for productivity, but at the same time, safeguards are needed from a worker safety, security standpoint, because technology platforms like the gig economy and so on and so forth tend to blur the lines between what we call contract of service versus contract for service, the employer and independent contractor, right? And I believe that the employers and individual employees need clear guidelines, guardrails that prevent worker exploitation, because we want to ensure that they can live their lives in full, right? Now we see remote working as well, right, being on the rise. That's good news in some sense that Malaysians can then work from Malaysia for jobs overseas remotely, right? But at the same time, there are jobs in Malaysia being then offshored to another remote worker somewhere around the world as well, right? So it still comes down to what skills do we need to be competitive in the marketplace here in Malaysia.
Very interesting indeed. And Dr. Suraya, if I could quickly pick up there, what KRI's perspectives insofar have been on the proposed progressive wage model, PWM, which of course would be able to translate all of these benefits with regards to wages to those from the lower income sectors?
Yes, this is a very important factor about the returns to labour. We've done some work on the returns to labour with the absence of minimum wage that was introduced by the government. And it appears that without government coming in and telling businesses to increase wages for the bottom 50%, wages have been stagnating. The baseline is that for the past 10 years, for the bottom 50 of our population, we only see real increment of about 56 RM per year. So that's for 50% of our population. Now, the minimum wage was a huge move to then make sure that labour is being, given the right wage scale for the productivity that they have given. And the other thing is that even when productivity is going up, it appears that some businesses are not rewarding or not giving the right amount or sufficient amount of returns to labour. And that's why we see a lot of our people physically going to other countries, which is not really a bad thing, but we lose that talent because we are not paying them enough wages. And therefore, this progressive wage model was introduced, but it was introduced voluntarily. This is when I think there should be some historical bent to this, because when it was centralized and minimum wage was given in terms of a fiat or a decree, it worked. So voluntary progressive wage model is something that needs a bit more stick to it rather than carrot, because what we don't want is we keep on losing our talent because the wages is too low. Now, we can say about upskilling, we can say about, we have a good talent, but if they are not compensated with decent wages, we will lose this talent. So I'm hoping that in this budget, some level of understanding that the culture we seem to have is that if there is no direct intervention or push from the government, wages will still be stagnating.
And of course, that affects the purchasing power. Mr. Ding, I want to ask you about the many entrepreneur programs that there are for SMEs under Budget 2023. Any feedback from the ground? Because you, of course, as the national president, get to hear all these voices from different SMEs.
2023, the budget is come out. I can't see anything have the budget for help our micro and the small SME. Right. But though I think 1 month ago have the amount is 100 million. I recent, and the money also have the in the MIDF, the micro, the 50,000 to 200,000 can loan if 2%. This loan also I very thank you for the government to take this budget is come up. This one is idea is not is a 2023 the budget. He only to look the help the micro is a lot of micro is a problem, but the case is don't have the funding to expand the business, and also micro many is a good product, but it's a financing had a problem. But also very thank you the government is give the 100 million to borrow the micro 50,000 to 200,000 for the interest loan is 2%.
So there have been some injections. Now we'll wait and see whether or not they are going to be able to expand sufficiently. Dr. Suraya, moving from there into cash aid, I really wanted to ask you about looking at the recently announced AG report as well about the fact that we have ballooned our subsidies bill by almost 300% of late. But at the same time, however, we can't cut back too much on subsidies. KRI's perspectives.
I like this question. If you look at all of the statistics about households and businesses currently, we have not really gotten to the place that we were, pre-pandemic, and exacerbated by the wars that we're having and the supply chain issues. Businesses and households are not really at the place where I think it is stable and they have that resilience. So yes, government too are having problems in terms of financial fiscal space. So what do we do now? Okay, so government is looking into rationalizing key subsidy items next year. The impact will be felt, I think, if they actually do this, the impact will be felt. To what degree that it will be cushioned off by the existing social protection schemes we have. So there must be some investment in social protection schemes. Wages must go up, but the businesses are not doing that well. So the balancing of all these levers must be looked upon very carefully by the government. So I think even when some incentives are being put in or mechanisms are being put in via the budget, we must actually look at the monitoring and tracking, because this is a very tricky situation. And I think we were discussing this before. If we don't do something this year, it's either businesses or households will really go, down south. So we just need to do the right things, look at the combination of policy options we have, but at the same time, track the impact and see what works. Because times are a bit unstable, I think.
Exactly, and data, of course, helps to inform policy, right? And it also should for the budget itself. Yunhan, from there, I'd like to move into what has been a huge focus of the Madani government in particular, increasing women's labour force participation rate from the current fairly low compared to even our regional stats, 56% to 60%. Men's LFPR has always been a relatively strong 81% comparatively.
Yep. And I think for Malaysia, if we are not taking full advantage of the other half of the labour force, we are missing out a huge opportunity for growth and productivity as well, right? And one thing that when we looked at other countries in terms of labour force participation rate, most developed nations have what we call a double peak, right? So when women enter the workforce, as they reach an age where they start families, they tend to drop out the workforce, and over time, after a few years, they tend to come back as well. So that's what causes the double peak. Now, in the Malaysia context, what we tend to observe is a single peak, right? So as women reach, between the ages of late 20s, early 30s, 35, then they start dropping off from the labour force, and they don't come back to work, right? So now why is that, right? And there are a few reasons that I believe contributes to that area. One is that potentially the job itself of how it's designed is not flexible or doesn't cater towards the needs of a diverse range of workforce potentially, right? There could also be biased perceptions to things like gaps in experience, right? Someone with work experience continuously versus how do you explain 5 years of working experience gap, 7 years of working experience gap, and people or employers may be incentivized to then reach out or take employees of those without career gaps, right? And also I think lack of access to affordable childcare tends to hold some people back, looking at how families are getting smaller, perhaps even more isolated. The social support network that people may have before may no longer be an option for some people, right? So ideally, we need to look at work environments that encourage women to return to the workforce in a capacity that befits their skills, their qualifications, and also with equitable pay. Right? It doesn't make sense, and we're not solving the problem if women only see low-value jobs as opportunities upon returning to work after, having certain level of skill sets and qualifications. Right? So I believe that the recent government efforts to push things like affordable childcare subsidies when it comes to nursery fees, right, the career comeback programs are definitely steps in the right direction. On top of that, certain reskilling programs that enable women to come back to work as well would be quite crucial, right? Because being up to date at the workforce, going through that and getting them up to speed on the latest in the industry does help ease them back into the workforce. And I believe that the private sector also plays a role in enabling this to happen, right? Because the jobs themselves need to be designed in a way that allows for flexibility. Now with the rise of hybrid work, remote work, this allows more opportunities for women to balance caregiving responsibilities as well as work, given that availability of technology. On top of that, on the private sector, we do need to encourage more women in leadership positions, right? And that would help create role models for women to look up to, and also career paths that they can go towards to encourage them to come back to work, right? And so when we look at some of the Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, they do have very clear family-oriented, family-friendly policies at work, generous parental leave policies, very strong emphasis on gender equality, and the work environment that's supportive, and all this has contributed to much higher LFPR among women in those countries as well.
Yeah. I hear you on all the points that you're speaking of. Let's talk about the missing component perhaps. We have also recently increased paternity leave to become 7 days. However, at the same time, it's nowhere near the 98 days, which are now mandated for all women in Malaysia wanting to take maternity. So how do we fill that gap? Because there are already certain business chamber associations that have gone on the record saying they are not going to be that interested in hiring women since they can take maternity leave up to 98 days.
So, yeah, perhaps Mr. Dean, you want to take that on?
Okay, this one is a benefit. I promoted is a guidance the equality by the give the father as the much time as the mother to care for the newborn. This is a help share is a responsibility of children the more evenly. Also, to request the lady, woman to work, to come out to work, so the economy also can help the husband. Another one is also our can less the foreign workers. This is very important. It's a challenges. It's a cost. You take the 98 days. Our SME is a problem. This is a very challenges. And instead, the company finance also is output, product liability also less, and also a lot. You see, sometimes the baby the sick, or sometimes have the problem. The many take the leave. But anyway, it's a. If my own opinion, I must do that because I want to less the foreign workers, use local workers.
So there has to be some balance.
Yes, yes, correct.
Another interesting part, Mr. Ding, can I ask you about the Women Business Financing Fund that under Budget 2023, Women Business Financing Fund for SMEs was announced, and its value is about 235 million ringgit. So what do you think are some of the impacts on women-run SMEs as well? How are they doing in Malaysia? Do they have any challenges that they come to the SME Association with?
Okay, 2023, the woman have the budget come out, but I never heard the funding. But the government have the budget to come out of this funding, but many our member for the woman, the business people, they also ask me how to borrow the funding, borrow the money, because look, the government have this funding a lot, but cannot get borrow the money. I hope the government is transparent. Which part can borrow for the woman to do the business and
how do you apply?
Yes, how to apply. But until today, also the woman do the business still say the loan is government don't have. But it's a budget I have, but I never didn't see, but not transparent. Maybe have, but don't know how to apply.
Right, so there's definitely a communication gap, and that needs to be closed, because as we do know, budget allocations, if they're not taken up during a previous year, there will definitely be a stronger inclination not to have them the next year.
Yes.
Moving along from there, Dr. Suraya, let's move into flood mitigation, natural disaster prevention, because this also has become a part of almost our daily lives, especially for those in urban centers in Malaysia. So when it comes to budget-related allocations for disaster readiness, does KRI feel that strengthening of government agencies, those allocations, when will we be able to see not just the impacts, but at the moment as well, we've been having quite a lot of flash floods due to the ongoing monsoon?
I think there's two things here. There's the mitigation COFAS and the adaptation COFAS. So I think rather than mitigate all the time, let's have some funding for adaptation. We are going through this, floods and other climate change incidences. I think we should have a climate adaptation policy, which the government has not gotten on doing it yet. So while we remain hopeful for this budget measure, we are not expecting anything. So the adaptation COFAS is not there, but logic would suggest that if we start doing it now, it would be in terms of it'd be lower in terms of cost. But for flood mitigation measures geared to the current 1.1 degrees of warming will need to be assessed if they are able to handle 1.5 or more than 2 degrees Celsius of warming that the future may bring. So this is an example what adaptation may demand. So that's for adaptation for current and for future. We would also like to see preventive measures to tackle sea level rise, since over 40% of our settlements, housing and businesses are in coastal areas, so there's no funding for that as yet. As for mitigation, while the current haze is due to fires in Indonesia, it is a reminder to protect and conserve our forests, as they currently balance around 65% of our emissions and will cover over 90% in the future. So further allocation to the ecological fiscal transfer to states for conservation would be welcome, because if you don't have that incentive, it might be just wiped off.
Yeah, and definitely building a little bit upon the 22B flood mitigation project that was just announced under RMK 12, the midterm review. Thanks so much, and so far. We take a quick break. We'll be right back with Niaga Spotlight, our Budget 2024 Roundtable Special. Don't go anywhere.
Magnum Matcha Crumble baru. Aiskrim matcha lembut, salutan coklat tebal, dan cepisan biskut rangup. Magnum Matcha Crumble baru. Magnum, kenikmatan sejati.
Voice kali ini udah macam bukan pertandingan nyanyian, dah macam pertandingan jenayah dah.
Aku terima kau yang dulu, tapi aku tak boleh terima kau yang lepas ni.
Dia tu baik tau.
Sibuk makeup betina tu.
Anak aku mana?
Kau jaga anak aku. Sekarang di hospital.
Kalau I tak ada jin, I lost it. I rasa ada problem.
$1 million bonus.
Stream Astro dan Astro dan On Demand.
Apa khabar orang utara? Jelajah jiwa SME akan jumpa hamba di Penang. Macam-macam ada. Ada bengkel usaha Unified Business, Bank Rakyat dan TikTok Shop, perkongsian ilmu dengan tokoh SME, sesi saya jual dan banyak lagi. Mana kata kita pakat jumpa 21 dan 22 Oktober ini.
Dibawakan oleh penaja utama Jelajah Jiwa SME, Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Perkembangan situasi semasa.
Beberapa negara di selatan Asia Tenggara dijangka dilanda jerebu berikutan pengesanan 353 titik panas.
Kerajaan akan membincangkan soal charge transaksi duit now QR dalam mesyuarat khas.
Setiap suara pasti didengar.
Perdana Menteri mengakui wujud keresahan berkaitan kenaikan harga barangan yang memberi kesan kepada perbelanjaan rakyat.
Ikuti segalanya hanya di AWANI 745.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight, still with our Budget 2024 Roundtable, bridging development as well as closing gaps. Right, now moving along into the finance and loans side of things, right? Mr. Ding, now of course, under Budget 2023, government agencies were supposed to provide 40 billion ringgit in loans and financing. This was for MSMEs, including loans from Bank Negara Malaysia, BSN and Tekun. What are some of the results so far, or what have you heard from all the SMEs around Malaysia?
This one is, I think, is Prime Minister the launching Pandani for economy. That one is a 40B, but and then now he talked to the BNM and the BSN and the Tekong, and I also heard the Mara, but it's a SME corp is a cannot get anything for the 40 billion the loan in the SME corp. But our SME also can't get the money to expand the business. At the moment, our SME is cannot get this 40 billion for in the loan. Actually, it is now is nobody to listen to can get. I also go to ask the another department. He say is announced has, but
allocation hasn't delivered.
The money is not coming.
Right. Okay. So still in the process then.
Yeah.
From there, Yun Han, I'd like to move back into your sharing with us any statistics or data that there is available on strategies when it comes to retaining talent. Picking up from, of course, what Mr. Ding had shared earlier, that one of our main reasons to encourage, of course, greater LFBR, also from women, is so that we can slowly become more self-dependent when it comes to our labor shortages.
Yep, absolutely. And I think when Mr. Ding and Dr. Surya shared around some of the concerns of cost of living and the challenges of getting skilled workforces in as well, challenges with wages that we see it. We do a survey from Deloitte standpoint every year around the millennial and now the Gen Z survey.
Sure.
And when we looked at the most recent 2023 results for the millennial and Gen Z survey for Malaysia, right, we find that 65% of the Gen Zs in Malaysia and 70% of the millennials in Malaysia are living paycheck to paycheck. And that's a large proportion. And we compare to other countries around the world, it's not abnormal, but Malaysia is a little bit higher compared to the rest as well. And therefore, the majority of the Gen Zs and millennials are rethinking the role of work in their lives, right? If they can't afford housing, for instance, then what am I working for, right? And therefore, this also contributes to them feeling anxious and stressed, right? Almost, if not all of the time. And when it comes to sustainability aspects, right? Climate change, sustainability is really at the top of mind for the millennials and the Gen Z, and it does impact their lifestyle choices, right? The kind of businesses they would buy things from, the kind of companies they would work for, careers choices they would choose as well around sustainability. So therefore, when it comes to attracting this cohort of talent, because they're going to be the next generation of talent, right? If not already, it is around fair and competitive rewards. Right? We must be able to provide compensation and benefits befitting the skill sets that they have, what the job requires, and what the market demands. Right? And this is one of the key things. Secondly, is around the commitment to skills development. Right? These individuals, they know that skills don't last forever. And if they are not working with an organization that's also committed to help them with that journey in reskilling and upskilling them, they'll go elsewhere. Right? So that has to be on top of the agenda. And last but not least is around meaningful work. Whatever work that they choose to do in whichever organization has to deliver an impact aligned to the values that they subscribe to. They don't want to be exchanging 48 hours per week of their life just for a paycheck. There are many options to do that, right? So what's going to differentiate an organization compared to the other is, do they subscribe to that mission of what the organization is trying to do at the end of the day? To me, it's these three things around compensation, commitment to upskilling, and meaningful work that we need to offer. Yeah.
Sure. Thanks so much for sharing that, Yun Han. And Mr. Ding, moving back into SMEs. Now, ESG is a term we hear so much about of late. And also, it's very important now for SMEs to have funding, to have the grant so that they are able to do ESG transformation. What is SME Malaysia's thought on what the allocation should be and what will it be used for?
Actually, now is EAG is 2026, the 1st of January, the Europe side want to start the carbon. Is it the manpower, the SME to start their EAG? Many the SME do not know even understand what is the EAG. They know that cannot export the good to the EU country, but the government also must train the SME to what is the EAG. I also propose the government to the EAG the funding, the 2 billion, because this 2 billion for the SME, the one-to-one, the matching grant to give the SME to transform to how to decide the EAG and the solar or everything for the technology, the green technology. But the EAG is because actually few years ago already start to start the EAG, but it's our government have the change is a problem, and this few years is not yet start the EAG. Now this year the government now is post the EAG, also the launching for the IEAG. But the EAG is very important for our Malaysian, because many, I can say the micro 78%, because our Malaysia, the SME is 1.17 million, but it's 78%, 78.4% is the micro and the small and the medium. But it's many, I think 90-something%, more than 90, I don't say the 100%, it's 90 more than 90 over %.
Sure.
It's can't understand what is the EAG. Now this few months, I also talking to the EAG, but still the micro and the SME can't understand what is the EAG. I hope the government, the budget is come out is 2 billion to help the SME one-to-one the grant, how to train our SME what is the EAG. Is not train the EAG. Is 2026 is a January, is a supply chain has a problem. You the export, you cannot go to Europe and EU country and the US country maybe reject your product, or maybe your tax is very high. Actually, this supply chains, to the export company, he supply the material is all must have the ESG. If you don't have the ESG, you can't supply this product. Is go to this factory is to do the export one. I hope government look at that very important for the ESG.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes,
Mr.
please.
Ding's point as well, because when it comes to ESG vis-a-vis SMEs and these organizations, it is something that's moving quite fast. Right, and just I think this year the IFRS International Sustainability Standards Board just announced a whole slew of new global sustainability and climate disclosure requirements, right, and standards. And this is going to form the basis of all the other regulators around the world of what is required in terms of climate change, environment, sustainability reporting, right? So it's going to be coming to Malaysia and it's going to be impacting SMEs, right? And in particular, when you read IFRS S2 as that standard, it sets out very clearly what are the compulsory reporting standards that you're looking at. And this requires that SMEs look at ESG seriously, not just as a passing interest that, oh, you know, it's not going to affect us. It will, because besides regulators, right, the investors, funding, right, they look at your ESG plan, sustainability plan, and are you eligible, right? And will they allocate funding to you? So it's going to hamper growth, as you said, export markets as well, right? Accessibility to markets if you're not ESG compliant or aligned to that agenda. And it comes back to also the kind of workforce that you need. Do you have the right workforce, the right skill sets, and the fact that if they are not even aware of the impact to ESG, that is a big gap that needs to be addressed. Right?
Absolutely. I'm hearing exactly what both of you are saying, because when it comes to the fact that Malaysia has been able to capture some profit opportunity from being a more integrated part of the supply chain, this could be gone by 2026 if we do not invest in our SMEs right now.
Yep.
All right. Dr. Surai, I want to move into EPF and ASB, particularly when it comes to the increase in the ASM fund in Malaysia by 5 billion ringgit. By 5 billion ringgit in total, and this has also been over the past 3 months alone been noted. What is this pointing towards when it comes to responsible investments and development of the national economy?
I think what one should look at this in terms of how do we best invest some of these, as the question was asking, how do we best invest this into true growth for our firms in order to give the right compensation, adequate, decent compensation for the workers. So one of the things that we are looking at is we've just had the new industrial master plan that has all the national energy transition roadmap, has all the climate, green industry being put into it as not really as a consequence, but as part of our new industrial master plan. And I think why am I bringing it in? Because we have all these plans. We should use the money that we have to invest in this plan. And one of the things that is quite clear in that industrial plan is to increase the complexity of products that we have so that we can move up the value chain. But the current challenge is not just increasing complexity, because in order to increase complexity, all firms must go into R&D. R&D meaning the retained profits from your firm must be ploughed back into the business and not really looking at shareholders' dividends. So this is where there's a fine balance here, how to make certain groups wealthy from their dividends, but how to ensure that the firms are sustainable in terms of innovation. So I think this is where entrepreneurs have to play their role in ensuring that as you grow more complex, you need more of your retained profits to be ploughed back into your businesses, but that communication must also be given to all your shareholders that, dividends might not be as high because we're ploughing it back into businesses. And I think I like what Yee-Hoon said just now, Mr. Lee said just now, because the new generation of workforce is not just looking for things that increase economic complexity or things like that, they also want something of value. Is this going to damage the environment? Are we building buildings on the slopes and it's going to cause more landslides? They want to be in something that creates value, not just for themselves, but society at large. I think us older generation should learn a lot from them because the impact of what we've done is being seen now. So I think one of the most important thing to really balance is what do we put for retained profit for businesses to grow, and how do we balance that need from shareholders that want high investment returns?
Definitely. Lots of great points in there, Dr. Suraya. Yunhan, anything to add to that when it comes particularly to EPF as well as protections for increasing this coverage for average Malaysians and also in particular those who are participating in the gig economy? By all numbers taken into consideration, about 26% of the labour force currently participates in the gig economy as their main form of employment.
Yeah. So I think the steps taken to improve the worker safety net is definitely a must, and it's a given. We need to continue doing that. Having said that, it still comes back to if I don't have enough to contribute to that safety net, that's the root cause of the problem that we do need to solve, right? Because with the amount of EPF savings that are there, the majority of people or account holders in EPF will not have enough for retirement. And this is something that EPF has said so themselves. It's also because they don't have sufficient funds or leftover funds to even contribute additionally, right? So if we do not address the earning capacity of those at the lower rungs of income, they won't be able to contribute to those kind of funds in any case, right? So coming back towards the how to solve this, because it's not so much relying on the private sector to just invest in skills, invest in development and increase their income. It's not just one-sided like that, right? Because from a private sector standpoint, they may say, I invest so much in skills, yep, you might leave to my competitor or another industry, right? So it has to be done in concert with government, the private sector, education institutions together, because the way to solve this as well is not just looking at it one-dimensionally, like pay you more just to get a job with the private sector, push the problem to the private sector, right? Themselves, as you were talking about, Mr. Ding, the micro businesses as well. These individuals at the lower rungs of the income levels, there are options not just for gainful employment, but also towards starting out their own micro businesses. So that also means the kind of skills that we need to develop for these individuals range into areas like how do we tap into ecosystems of workforce, talent and businesses, right? Collaboration skills, business acumen that will help equip themselves towards multiple modes of income rather than just I need to study and then just get a job as the single solution to that, right? So that's how I look at addressing that as a longer term, focusing on the individual to then increase their income through better productivity and skills. Yeah.
Sure. Now, definitely genuinely future-proofing the Malaysian workforce, in particular, of course, Gen Z, right? Mr. Ding, from there, I want to discuss food security for a while. Now, food security, when it comes to SME Malaysia, there have been quite a few grants that were allocated under Budget 2023. We also had BNM's Agro-Food Financing Scheme offering loans, as well as Agrobank's Agro-Food Financing Fund. What have been some of the outcomes or any progress that you have heard from your partners on the ground?
Okay, the Agro-Food Fund is funding is because also our member for the farmer to complain to me the agro food fund, the funding is very difficult to get the funding. Also he asked a lot the document and some because it's too many, some because some cannot get this document. It's very difficult to borrow this funding because Malaysia the food is import is more than 600 million. You see, it's a very a lot because you see. I hope the government is support the young people, the university come up for the Pertanian or UPM to easy to get the funding to help to young people to do this farming, the digital farming. Is because many Malaysia have the technology, but it's young people who don't have the money because the funding is very difficult to get. I hope this government, the budget is 2024, and also the apply this funding is must simple, transparent, and easy to apply. You see, Malaysia, why a lot land, empty land? Why? They want to tanah the vegetable, a lot can do the food. No need to import. Same the corn. Our also corn 100% import.
Correct. So we cannot technically say we are a chicken producer if we are importing all the feed, right? Right. Fair enough.
At least it's a government must do. You want to help the farmer is must do easy to transparent to apply give the farmer to chance to apply this money how to deliver the food our agro food. I hope the agro bank is to maybe to change apply the process. The process is simple and transparent and faster.
So cutting down all the red tape. Yeah, definitely. We hear you, Mr. Ding. Thank you for that. And from there, Dr. Suraya, so how ought we to be responding in light of not just, of course, climate-related factors, but of course the recent increase in rice prices, a suturing of our supply chains, and what we were expecting was going to be something reliable, such as the rice supply from India. We're definitely going to have to move towards being far more self-reliant for food security.
So Malaysia imports around 35 to 45% of the total rice required, and the rest we meet by domestic production. And domestically, we produce about 1.7 million metric ton of rice per year, whereby 60% are produced from the northern states of Peninsula, namely Perlis, Kedah, Penang and Perak. So this poses a food security risk, as it takes only one natural disaster in northern states, and we could experience a severe shortage of domestic rice. So one of the things we thought that could be done, of course this is a long-term thing, but this could help by improving rice production in Sabah and Sarawak. This is something we could do. And at the same time, I think in terms of food security and self-sufficiency, I think for KRI, we do believe that there are many other pillars that we should, lens that we should look at when we look at self-sufficiency and food security, because it has to be affordable. Sometimes I just give you maybe a devil's advocate type of opinion. Sure. Because we might think we can produce everything here, but unfortunately our soil is not that great. The things that we think we can produce for less is not really the case, and we need a lot of government injection into it. So sometimes it's, if we produce it here, but it becomes more expensive and it's not accessible, which is part of what food security means. I mean, if you produce it all by yourself in the country and yet just 20% of the top could consume it, and it's not accessible. So I think this food security self-sufficiency rate needs to have a bigger, wider lens of assessing it in terms of accessibility and what do you call this, accessibility especially, and affordability.
Certainly. Thank you for that, Dr. Suraya. And Yun Han, moving from there into digitalization. Now that is definitely a huge agenda under Budget 2024, which we're hoping will be announced favorably. Thoughts around the importance of access to stable internet. It's not just about internet penetration anymore, right? Particularly when it comes to the development of more rural areas, and even, of course, Sabah and Sarawak, which have perennially had these issues.
Yeah, I think it's a no-brainer. It has to be done, right? To the extent I would believe that internet access, stable internet access at adequate data transfer speeds is fundamentally a human right, right? To be able to access that. And on top of that is also the ability to access affordable means to get to that internet, right? Be it smartphones, devices, tablets, laptops, right? They need access to that too. Because with the amount of resources available online at their fingertips, right? The learning curve isn't that steep to get on and to explore. And with so many free learning courses out there, whether it's around electronics, plumbing, carpentry, business running, EV, robotics, programming, right? These are available skill sets just there. All you have to do is to provide internet access to that area. Now, of course, the effort or the infrastructure spending for that can be huge, right? But I think the payoff is also tremendous, because in organization, or at least in countries that we look at, like Australia, for example, it is a huge landscape, right? And the federal government there in Australia, they committed, I think, nearly $1 billion Australian dollars over a period of a few years to actually improve mobile connectivity, last mile connectivity, that essentially also serves to benefit the indigenous or Orang Asli in Australian rural areas, right? And this involved not just federal government spending, local government spending, state government spending, private corporations, NGOs, community organizations, and the telco providers themselves, all coming together to enable this infrastructure to be put together, right? And of course, it is important for efforts like that to have transparency in the spending, but also when it comes to execution, that is also well done. So at the end of the day, the rakyat in the rural areas get stable, fast access to internet that they need.
Absolutely, and also not forgetting the fact that it involves access of students particularly to not just e-learning, but also being able to succeed in the future of work. One last area I'd like to close out the discussion. Mr. Ding, let's talk about tourism when it comes to Budget 2023 allocations. What are some of the needs for our SME tourism industry players? What are their pain points and their challenges, and how will they be able to get back to pre-pandemic levels? We are still not there yet, right?
Okay, the tourism is very important for our country, because tourism is very easy for the income, very fast to the income our economy. I hope the government same the tourism is same the Thailand to open from China is no need to visa. Because Malaysia, the economy is down, very slow down, and also you will ask the tourism come open the Malaysia. I hope the government to expand our Malaysia, the tourism to to promote our Malaysian in our whole world, to promote the whole world tourism. And the tourism is all coming, can earn the tourism, the money is very fast for our production.
So maybe that would involve maybe tax exemption
for
the low-cost hotels and any other wants that the SME has?
Tax exemption is now is the SST for the hotel, motel. Motel now is 500,000. Is not the SST, but now the motel is. I hope the government look at this. The budget is 500 increase to 1.5 million. Below 1.5 million, he don't have the zero SST test, because it's cheaper, and all the for the tourism coming to our Malaysia, the budget hotel. Because now the budget hotel is 500. It's more the 500. More the turnover is more 500,000. He already have the SST test. I hope this 500,000 to increase to 1.5 million. Because now the restaurant is 1.5 million. Why the budget hotel also can out to 1.5 million? Is below the 1.5 million is a zero SST test.
Certainly. All right. Thank you so very much. I wish we had more time, so much more to discuss, but as always, a pleasure, Dr. Suraya, Mr. Ding, as well as Yuen Han. So that has been our Budget 2024 Roundtable, only on Niaga Spotlight with me, Tehmina Kaoosji, of course, balancing development and closing gaps. We hope you have a productive Friday ahead, and see you next time.